Welcome to the Art of Conscious Living TV. I'm very pleased today as my guest, Mirabai Starr from New Mexico, Taos, New Mexico. She's an author of many books, and the book we're going to be speaking about is The Dark Night of the Soul, and she will introduce all of her other books that she's written also. I'm very pleased to have her via Skype today. Thank you. How are you today?
I'm great, Victoria. Thank you for having me.
Well, let's start with your books. If you could give me the names of your books, please.
Oh, gosh, there are quite a few of them, but I've translated the Spanish mystics, Saint John of the Cross, Dark Night of the Soul, and Saint Teresa of Avila, The Interior Castle and the Book of My Life, and I've also translated the medieval English mystic Julian of Norwich. But I've also written quite a few books on different other mystics where I used selections of their writings and then my own reflections, usually kind of poetic reflections. So St. Francis of Assisi and Our Lady of Guadalupe, who's the Latina version of Mother Mary. And I wrote a book called God of Love, a guide to the heart of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, that is kind of a celebration of the interconnected wisdom of the three Abrahamic faiths, which at a time like this, when there's such discord in the world and in the Middle East in particular, is a contribution, I hope, to peace on earth. But the book that's probably the most alive for me right now is my memoir, the first book that I really have written about my own life and my own path. And it's called Caravan of No Despair. The subtitle is A Memoir of Loss and Transformation. And it's actually about the coinciding of the release of my first book, Dark Night of the Soul, with the death of my 14-year-old daughter Jenny in a car accident in October of 2001, and how those two things coming together really set the course of my inner life and my outer life in many ways.
Well, Mirabai, let's start right there. Uh, the Dark Night of the Soul and coinciding with the death of your beautiful daughter at the age of 14, how does one turn the Dark Night of the Soul into, when you're having despair, into knowing that you'll be okay at one point and you'll be able to live again?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question, Victoria. And the answer is we don't get to know that we're going to be okay. In fact, probably the defining attribute of a true transformational spiritual experience, known as a dark night of the soul, is that we don't get to know that there's light at the end of that tunnel. There is the necessity to completely surrender to the darkness and to radical unknowingness, to the mystery itself. You know, there's the dark night of the soul is a phrase that's used in our culture as a misnomer most of the time, at least in terms of how John of the Cross, the 16th century Spanish monk, meant it. When John was speaking about a dark night of the soul, he was speaking about a beautiful blessing of a spiritual experience when all of our attachments to the way we have been accustomed to feeling the presence of the sacred dry up and fall away. And all of our concepts of what God is, what the spiritual path is, what the goal of life is, all of that becomes kind of empty and meaningless. And the reason John says that this is a blessing rather than a terrible tragedy, which is what it feels like, is that we're being freed of ourselves. We're like getting out of our own way. We're becoming spiritually naked so that we can have a direct experience of the divine without all our ideas on the matter. Now, what does this have to do with death and grief? Well, according to John of the Cross, it's not a matter of external circumstances, like something terrible happens, like what happened to me, and I'm sure many of your viewers, sorry to say, have experienced the death of very close beloveds. So it's not about external circumstances such as that, John says. It's about a very private internal spiritual crisis where we've progressed along our path enough to let go of our attachments, to let go of what stands between us and a direct connection with the beloved. as the mystics call God. However, I have found that external circumstances such as what I went through, the death of my beloved child when my entire universe went up in flames, are opportunities to actually rest in the emptiness of radical mystery. And if we don't rush in to fill it, if we don't try to solve the problem of death with our limited conceptual minds, and if instead we allow ourselves down into the arms of the fire, which is what we're doing, and just be with it, then I think that transformation that the mystics speak about that can happen in a dark night experience can happen through the doorway of grief and loss.
So it's a clearing away of our own self, of our familiarity, and emptying ourselves. And with curiosity, we go into the realms of the unknown, as you speak about. But in there's so much sacredness that will speak to us in great ways, which, opposed to being lost in despair and lost in the story forever, it's opening to divinity. Let's speak about that. Are you a Gnostic, correct?
No, I'm not a Gnostic. I don't know. I'm not sure what you mean.
I think I read correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought I read in one of your interviews or heard on one of your interviews that you were a Gnostic in searching.
Oh, no, I wouldn't call myself a Gnostic. I mean, at least not in the formal sense of the term, the esoteric sense. No, maybe somebody said that. People say all kinds of stuff about me.
Okay. So what are you then?
Some people call me a mystic, but I would never call myself that. That's like calling yourself a saint. You don't get to do that. I'm not, so what am I then? I would not define myself. In fact, that's probably my defining characteristic is my refusal to define myself. You know, my life has been spent navigating what might be called an interspiritual path. That is, I have said yes to the sacred, to the presence of the divine everywhere I encounter it. In Judaism, in Christianity, in Islam, Sufism, in Hinduism, in Buddhism, in Native American traditions. And so my heart is open to the beloved wherever the beloved reveals itself. And so I wouldn't say that I'm in any particular spiritual tradition, although I have deeply studied and practiced many of them.
Well, it seems that the tone was set at a very young age because your parents were open to all of the things that you've mentioned, and they lived a very free lifestyle. You had experiences in northern Mexico in Taos, in a center there, and it set the tone for the rest of your life, did it not?
Yes, that's very much true. My family were secular, non-religious Jews in New York. And in the 60s, during the Vietnam War, they were very active in the anti-war movement. And at a certain point, that consciousness that was awakening for many people in their peace activism led them to leave behind the kind of safe, secure suburban lifestyle that they had been living in and raising our children in, and uprooted us. And we went on a kind of caravan. We traveled for about a year, living mostly in Mexico, and then ended up in New Mexico, in the mountains of northern New Mexico, living communally, back to the land, sustainably. And at that time, I was 11, we were introduced through our alternative school to many different spiritual traditions because Lama Foundation was nearby and they were very involved in the school. Lama Foundation is the place where Ram Dass wrote Be Here Now. And Lama was a place, and still is a place, where all of the world's great sacred traditions are practiced. Teachers from all religions would come and offer retreats there. And I was exposed through the school, and then later as a young teenager, moving to the Lama Foundation, to the community on my own, I was exposed to all of the different wisdom traditions in a very deep way. And so right from the beginning, I saw them all as being true and equally valid.
you spoke of all your spiritual connections that you've viewed, and also all behind you on your wall, you have a lot of different masters and tangas, Buddha tangas. Is there one favorite person at this time that you really would want to speak about, and that's very dear to your heart?
Oh, it's a beautiful question, Victoria. Well, let's see. I'll try to position my hand. That's Maharaji. Neem Karoli Baba. Neem Karoli Baba is my guru and has been since I was 14 years old when I met Ram Dass, and he introduced me to this great saint, Neem Karoli Baba from India. Right around the time that I was exposed to Neem Karoli Baba, who we call Maharaji, he died. He left his body in India, and many people know of his teachings through Ram Dass, who wrote Be Here Now and many other books, but also through Krishna Das, the chant master, who is also a devotee of Neem Karoli Baba. And I just have come home a couple of days ago from a retreat in California, which was the first ever Ram Dass legacy retreat. Ram Dass is elderly, and he had a stroke a few years ago, and he's beginning to build his legacy. And he asked me to be his first Dharma teacher in this first legacy retreat. And so my heart is very full right now from that experience of offering teachings at that retreat. And Neem Karoli Baba is the saint who guides my steps in many ways, and who was like me, and I think this is why I'm this way, was open to all the world's religions and spiritual traditions. His favorite saying was "Sab ek" in Hindi, which means all is one.
Yes, some time ago I saw the documentary of Ram Dass, Fierce Grace.
Yeah.
What does this mean to you, fierce grace, and what is that?
That's interesting because, Ram Dass, that term came to him when he had his stroke, which was exactly 20 years ago. And he lost all of his great capacities. I mean, he was an incredible speaker, brilliant, funny, quick, warm, engaging, and all of that went away because of the aphasia. Plus, he was paralyzed on one side, still is, and lost the freedom of his life. He was still only in his early 70s, so he was vital, and it was a huge loss. And he came to see this experience as a matter of fierce grace, the grace of the Guru. Guru Kripa is the term in Sanskrit. But it takes a while before we can actually see, even if we're a great spiritual teacher like Ram Dass, to really see difficult circumstances as grace. I mean, you can't tell someone that in the beginning. It's offensive to suggest that to someone. Right. We all have to go through our own metamorphosis, right?
So Mirabai, is that saying that the fierceness, is this meaning that you're putting great focus, great attention?
Right. There is a certain degree of vigilance and diligence and discipline.
And concentration.
Concentration, all of that, absolutely. But it's also that the universe itself, the beloved herself, the Guru himself, are not always light and fluffy. That love isn't necessarily something that's a feel-good state. It's sometimes the Kali energy, or the sword of Manjusri in Buddhism, or the fire of Shiva. Today is Shivaratri in the Hindu tradition, which is about transformation. And that transformation is not always comfortable. In fact, unfortunately, it often comes through fire.
Well, let's speak further about your passing of your daughter at age 14 and how you used these knowings that you have through that process. And how long did that go on, and what was that like?
Well, as I said in the beginning, Victoria, there was no knowing involved. It was a matter of unknowing. It was a matter more of dismantling all my concepts. Whatever I thought about God, Guru, spiritual path, it all dissolved in my hands, and none of the spiritual methodologies that I had so carefully cultivated over decades on the spiritual path. I was 40 when Jenny died, and I was 14 when I started on my path in a pretty serious way. And so all of that went out the window, and all I could do was breathe in the darkness of what was happening. I knew only that I knew nothing, and that I knew enough to not believe everything I think. So any kinds of ideas I had on the matter, spiritual bypasses that would take me away from the experience by virtue of coming up with some kind of spiritual explanation, none of that was valid. That somehow years of contemplative practice, meaning my main spiritual practice, I would say, has been meditation, silent meditation, helped me just enough to show up for the experience and be present for it. And I guess I would say, Victoria, that it wasn't mindfulness practice. Like, I had been trained for a long, long time in mindfulness meditation practices, which are really helpful, but that's not what it was. It was, I called it heartfulness practice, because what I was doing was I was being present with what is, allowing myself to rest in the mystery with compassion, with tenderness, even with curiosity, but not as a matter of, look, I can do this, I can be mindful even in hell. It was about, Jenny, my love, my child, I am not going to turn from you. Jenny was killed in a car accident. It was very sudden. There was no preparation. And all I knew was that I owed her my vigilant attention as I navigated the tragedy, that I was going to be there. I was going to be present. I wasn't going to check out. And that's why I did it. I did it as an act of love, as an act of devotion, not as an act of spiritual heroism.
Right. In the Buddhist tradition, they speak of witnessing. What does this mean to you?
What a wonderful question. I've actually been thinking about this recently, because in attempting to carry Ram Dass's legacy, I've been working with his teaching of detachment versus dissociation. So the witness, which is a big part of Ram Dass's teachings from the Hindu tradition, it's also the Hindu tradition as well as the Buddhist tradition, the witness is that kind of higher self who, even while we're suffering, or even while we're rejoicing, even while we're in the midst of the human experience, the messy, what did Zorba the Greek call it in Kazansaki's novel, the great catastrophe, or something like that. Even in the midst of the human experience, we are able to cultivate this broader view, this higher self that can look on our experience. Like, I remember when Jenny died, there was this kind of rueful mantra that would go through my mind of, it's just unbearable anguish, Mirabai. It's just unbearable anguish. And I knew that I was bearing the unbearable. It was impossible. It was horrible. My life, my heart's being torn open and shredded. And there was a part of me, even while I was in the middle of it, there was a part of me that was able to witness that experience, not from a place of cold detachment looking down on my poor miserable self, but from a place of great compassion, like Kuan Yin in the Chinese Buddhist tradition, Tara in the Tibetan tradition, or Mother Mary, who radiates compassion.
And over time, did this witnessing and this feeling of compassion, did it start growing in time, and did it start consuming you at one point?
Yeah, I don't know about consuming me, because this whole process has been very subtle and very organic. It's sort of like over a period of years, I just was able to notice that Jenny's death, the circumstances of her death, had begun to integrate with the fabric of my whole being and my whole life story, and find its rightful place. And that I, as a mother, as a woman, as a human being, as a spiritual seeker and a spiritual teacher, and all of those things, was finding my rightful place in the midst of the human condition. That rather than render me somehow special by virtue of having experienced the death of a child, I connected with mothers, with human beings everywhere throughout time who have also experienced this particular kind of loss. You know, Pema Chodron, the great contemporary American Tibetan Buddhist teacher, speaks about finding our place in the whole of the human condition and not being special and just being connected. That's what's special, is that we are all interconnected and we all belong.
Right. There's a saying that not to seek love, but to remove the barriers that block the love. It's a Rumi expression. Mariam Williamson has also spoke about it. What does this mean to you, what love is? And we are pure love on innate nature, all of us, but we have so much barriers as blocking the love. So,
yeah, well, that's beautifully said and quoted, Victoria. I think that's exactly right. Our true nature is love. I mean, that's why the mystics of all traditions that I know of speak of God or ultimate reality or the supreme being as the beloved. And all mystical traditions come down to the essential distilled teaching that we are that. Thou art that, it says in the Upanishads, in Hinduism, and that is echoed in every other spiritual tradition. That true essence of God, which is love, is our true being also, and that we are not different than that. And so how do we dismantle those barriers? Well, spiritual practice really helps. Cultivating really honest, vulnerable human relationships really helps. And the inevitable life experiences that bring us to our knees help to take down those barriers. And so that's why what you said so beautifully in the beginning, Victoria, that there is a sacred quality that is just on the other side of our suffering, is really well said. Because when we allow ourselves to be in the mystery and quiet our minds, we will find that even in the midst of the deepest darkness, there is this wellspring of love. And that is why we're here.
there seems to be one constant that's woven through all of the great saints and mystics and all of the spirituality. And they speak very much prominent today of that. They speak about the heart. And what is the heart? And it's not the heart that is our beating heart. It's our core essence in our gut where our heart resides. It's our true nature of who we are, of our purity, of purifying ourselves all the time in every given moment. Would you speak about what you know of the heart and in all religions, what they're speaking about?
Yeah, I think you got it. It's that spiritual center. It's not a physical thing, and it's not an intellectual thing. It's that center of our beings. You know, in Hinduism, in the chakra system, there are 7 chakras, right? So the heart is the center. There are 3 above and 3 below. It's the heart cave, the Hridayan, they call it in Hinduism. It's the center of our being. And so all of spiritual practices in many ways are an effort to bring ourselves back again and again and again to the center of our being. You know, for people who are very intellectually oriented, and I've always been my whole life, it's a constant practice to come back to the heart and to the knowingness of the heart that transcends all language. And so that's why some practices like chanting in any spiritual tradition, sacred music, chanting, is a wonderful way to come back to the heart. Silent meditation is another way to quiet the mind and return to the knowingness of the heart. And as far as words go, sacred poetry, like you talked about Rumi, my namesake, Mirabai, the 16th century Hindu mystic in love with Lord Krishna, the god of love, her poetry, Hafiz, St. John of the Cross, Teresa of Avila, all of these great mystical poets write from the place of the heart, and in reading their words, especially aloud, it knocks on the door of our own heart, and our hearts open. So I'm a huge advocate of mystical poetry as a spiritual practice. And also devotion. You know, that's something that's lost favor in our kind of postmodern culture, where we're not supposed to give our power away, right? To the guru, to another being. Even to see ultimate reality or God as other than the self is considered to be a fallacy. And yes, I agree with all of that, and yet there is this power, this beauty in cultivating devotion through chanting, through prayer, through bowing at the feet of the invisible, and doing so with our hearts intentionally open. And so devotion is a wonderful way to stay connected to the heart. And then I use a practice whenever I can, just driving, doing dishes, interacting with people, of trying to return my attention to my heart and breathe in and out of my heart as if my breath were physically coming in and out of my heart. It's a practice to keep me centered in my center.
Oh, we have just a few moments left, Mirabai. I'd like to ask you to share something that's very dear to your heart at this moment in time, with all of what we're facing here in the world of politics and economics and the world stage.
Yeah, great question, Victoria. You know, for many years in my non-dual practices, I tried to not make a distinction between masculine and feminine, because I felt like that was unnecessarily dualistic. But I have returned now to emphasizing the feminine, and to reclaiming the voice of the feminine, both in my own life and in my work and in my teaching and in the world, because I truly feel that the feminine wisdom is the antidote to the poison of racism and sexism and xenophobia and all of the other hateful modes that are being demonstrated on the world stage right now. And so to return to the feminine values of connectivity, of relational, collaborative emphasis, where we're all it. We are all it. We can't wait for some great white male savior to fix it all. It's going to happen in that feminine way of connecting and mutually empowering.
And how do you think this can happen? How can the divine or the feminine be more activated on the world stage?
I think all of us, women and girls, need to stand up in whatever it is that are our gifts, and our gifts we'll know our gifts by the way they resonate and bring us joy. Whatever it is that it most fills us and enlivens us, we need to bring that and stand up and speak out and connect with each other and organize and activate. It's our turn.
Well, Mirabai, thank you very much. It's been a great, great pleasure and a great honor to speak with you. Thank you
for inviting me. Thanks, Victoria.
And from the Art of Conscious Living TV, do take care of yourself and take care of others.